Welcome everyone to the LEAD School Masterclass. This is the second session of our Creative Writing Masterclass. We received an exceptionally positive response from our students for the Chetan Bhagat session conducted last Sunday, which saw over 50,000 students participate and learn in that 1 hour session. We hope each one of you here enjoyed it too. Today, we have packed an even more exciting, enriching, and engaging session, and the instructor for today's session is Mrs. Sonia Bareja. She is a professional storyteller and has been teaching creative writing for the last 10 years. Having interacted in and taught thousands of kids, she will help us in learning to exercise our creativity, to write stories and poems, explore our ideas, and express our thoughts better. We'll request parents and guardians sitting with our little students to help them put any questions or comments that they have in the chat box and even help them put replies in the chat for any questions or quiz that they can answer during the session. You can find the chat box right below the video if you're accessing it from your mobile, and on the right hand side if you're accessing it from your desktop or laptop. So without further ado, let's start with our session today.
Thank you so much, Himanshu, and welcome you all to this nicely packed afternoon on a Sunday. And I promise and assure you that this is going to be a very fun-filled afternoon with lots of learning and lots of fun. So you'll have a good time for, let's say, next 1 hour. But before we begin, let's do something interesting to warm up ourselves. And the best thing to warm up is to play with our breath. We all breathe continuously. I'm going to teach you or show you an interesting way of breathing to increase your lung capacity. All of you can see me, so look at me very carefully and let's repeat it maybe 2 times or 3 times. You're supposed to take a deep inhalation, a deep breath. And when you release the breath, you're going to fold your 2 hands and you're going to move your hands forward like as if it's a snake. And you keep exhaling till you have stretched your arms like a big snake. Are you all ready? And it's called snake breathing. This kind of breathing enhances your lung capacity, makes you a good orator, and really helps you in terms of fighting all the diseases because it strengthens your immunity. Come on, let's begin. 1, 2, 3. That's 1. Let's do 1 more time. I want all my children here to do this time. 1, 2, 3. Take a long, deep breath. Good one. And let's just do this 1 more time. And I want you all to write it in the chat or the comment section that if you did it and if you liked it. If you didn't like it, are you going to do it every day, 3 times, 4 times? If you liked it, then I can tell you more breathing exercises. Come on, let's do it one last time. Deep inhale. Thank you so much. If you did it and if you didn't do it, you do it after you finish the session. So today we're going to learn and talk about stories. Stories is something which we all grow up with. When we are born, our parents tell us stories, then our teachers tell us stories, then our peers and colleagues tell us stories, and everybody tells stories to each other. You know, we firmly believe at our firm that we are the stories we tell. And also, we are born to tell stories. Just imagine when evolution was taking place and the prehistoric men were in caves, they were staying in the caves. That was the time when they communicated through sounds. They would communicate through oh. These were the sounds they were communicating with. Then The sounds gave birth to words. Here, there, go, come, I, she, just the words came. And the words gave birth to sentences. Sentences like simple ones. I live here. Where do you live? I'm good. How are you? Then the words gave, then the sentences became stories. And stories came into place many, many, many thousands of years ago. So, what exactly is a story? Today, let's start with what exactly is a story. For that, let's just share the screen. Just give me a quick second. Yes. What is a story? A story is basically a series of events, whether fictional or non fictional, that has happened over a period of time, and it is told either verbally or in words or in any form of communication, even if it's told through body language, which is sign language, then also is a story. And a story basically is best when it is told through words, which are either oral or through text when it is written. Now, there are many, many themes of stories, many types of stories, but broadly speaking, there are four of them. And I'm going to tell you about those four first. The first one is fables. Fables, as most of you would have heard, exist in the name of Aesop fables. It is believed that there was this Greek man, a wise Greek man named Aesop, who would generate these stories, obviously orally, he was not writing it. He would generate these stories, and a lot of them keeping animals as a central character, and each story would have a message, a moral lesson or a message in it. And those stories flew from thousands of years to till date. And now we know them as Aesop fables. A very common Aesop fable which we all have grown up with is the hare and the tortoise. So these are the kind of stories with animal as a central character and a message are known as Aesop fables or simply fables. The second main type is folk tales. Again, folk tales are also the tales or the stories which have traveled history, long and long, long, long years of tradition. But the only difference is that the central point of those stories are people and not animals. And again, there is a message, there is a hidden message, or there is a moral lesson which is there in all the stories. A very famous story, which is a folk tale, is Stone Soup, which has traveled from Egypt and Europe and certain parts of Africa and traveled to India. So there are folk tales from each country, each continent, they have their own folk tales. And third type is myth, the myth tales, the stories of religion, the sacred stories, the stories that talk about our origin, the stories that talk about life, the stories that talk about death, the stories that are sacred are myth or mythological tales. Most of the mythological tales have originated as written stories, either in the form of manuscripts or in the form of any written thing, inscriptions or anything, and they're still preserved as written form. Your Ramayanas and the Mahabharatas are mythological tales. The fourth type of famous type of stories is legendary stories, the legend tales as they're called as. Now, the legend tales are the traditional tales. They have traveled again thousands of years, where the story characters, the events, and the story elements have not changed from many years. All your fairy tales, your famous Cinderella tale, your very famous Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, nobody has changed the characters. It was same hundreds of years ago, and today also when we share the story of Cinderella, it still remains the same. So these are mostly the four main types of stories. Then there are other forms also, like historical tales, tall tales, trick tales. But like I said, I'm going to tell you about these basic, very, very important four types of stories. Now, let's get to what is a story made up of, or what comprises the story. And in the language of stories or the world of books, we call them as story elements. Let's have a look at it. So when you talk of story elements, an easy way of remembering story elements is this hand with 5 fingers. If you can also see it on the screen. So there are 5 elements, 5 fingers. Each finger will represent an element, and that's how we will remember it. The first one, characters, settings, plot, conflict, and resolution. So that's how we remember the 5 elements. Now, in today's session, we are going to talk about each of these elements in detail. We'll understand and we'll cite examples. And we'll take examples from you also so that we know that you have understood it. For this, I'm now stopping to share. And let's get to each element and starting with characters. Characters are most important aspect of a story because that's about whom the story is. Basically, characters of a story are people, creatures, or animals. They could be animals where about whom the story is. The writer or the author always writes in details about these characters. There's a detailed description with respect to their physical attributes, how the character looks, how the character is shaped, where does the character live, and what does the character like, what does the character dislike, what is it that he loves the most, what is it that he hates the most. The author introduces the character with all these attributes. Everything is told to the reader so that we as readers become familiar with how our character is. Then another thing which I want to also tell is that there is a main character in a story and then there are other characters in a story. The main character has a name to it. Sometimes we also know the main character as the hero of the story, who fights for the cause, who emerges as a winner at the end of the story. He or she is called as protagonist, irrespective of the gender, whether it's a male hero or a female hero, irrespective, even if it's an animal or even if it's animated character or a boy or a girl or a man or a woman, it's called a protagonist. If you want, we can write the word in the chat box. Himanshu, if I may request you to write this word in the chat box for all of them to note it down.
Sure.
It's called a protagonist, the main central character. And also, let me tell you, don't worry, because we are talking about character and characterization at length in our next session, because the next session has one complete segment on explaining character and characterization. But for now, I'm just telling you in brief that the main character is called protagonist, and it is irrespective of the gender. Then the protagonist is the one who determines the overall flow of the story, how the story is going to unwind. Then there is a anti-main character, or like in different stories we also we also call them as villain, or a character with gray shades. That character is called as antagonist. Again, antagonist is also irrespective of the gender, but antagonist is opposite to protagonist. So while protagonist is the main character of the story, antagonist is the character with gray shades, someone who the protagonist fights with to solve the problem. Now, if you have understood this character definition, I have a question to ask my audience here. If you have read the story of Cinderella, if all of you have read the story of Cinderella, who can tell me that who are the characters? Give me the name of few characters in the story Cinderella. Can you please write it in the chat box, and I can ask or request Himanshu to see if they have understood it, and are they telling us who are the few characters that comes to your mind when you think of Cinderella as a story.
Yes, students have started giving some examples. Some of them are saying Cinderella itself.
Yeah.
There is Prince. There
Yeah.
is Mother.
True, true,
Yeah,
true.
yeah, going right.
So there
Lot
is
of
Ella, whose name becomes
Ella. Yeah.
Cinderella. Then there are stepmom, stepsisters, prince, and one last. There is another very important character in the story. Who's got that? Who
Mm,
helps Ella to go to the ball? What's the name of that character? Has anybody got it, Himanshu?
so kids are typing mouse, prince.
Who gave mouse to Ella? Who's that character who gave the mouse and turns the pumpkin into a carriage? What is the name of that character?
Fairy. There
Yes,
is,
God Fairy. Yes, that's the character's name, God
yes.
Fairy. Thank you so much. So there are these 4 5 characters in the story. There's Ella, there is a stepmom, there are 2 stepsisters, there is a prince, and then there's a God Fairy mother. And why I say that these are the main characters? Because the story is woven around these main characters. Ella is the protagonist. Now, my question is, who according to you are the antagonists? Let's see, Himanshu, if somebody has an answer to this. Who do you think are the antagonists in the story Cinderella?
Sure. So Sunita Suni is saying grandmother.
Grandmother?
Anvi Man is saying fairy. I
Oh,
think kids are running their imagination right now.
no. So I'll repeat. Antagonist is the character with a negative shade. Someone who does bad in the story is antagonist. Someone who's the hero of the story is a protagonist. So Ella is the hero of the story. She's the main character. So she's a protagonist. Now, who is this character with a negative shade? Jo bura hai, someone who's bad. Who do you think is the bad character in Cinderella?
Yeah. Hardik Sharma, Advita, Nisha, a lot of them are saying stepmother.
Yes, absolutely. And they all are correct, Himanshu. So, stepmom and stepsisters are the antagonist in the story. So, it's very important for us to remember the protagonist of a story and antagonist of a story and few characters who play a very important role in unwinding the story. So, stepmom and stepsisters are anyway important. God Fairy Mother plays a very important role because she comes at a point in the story where Ella has to take a decision whether she can go to the ball or she can't go to the ball. Prince is also a very important character because he ends up taking away the misery of Ella and by marrying her or by bringing her to the castle. So it's very important for us to remember these main character and few more characters who play instrumental role in taking the story forward. I hope we are good with understanding of what are characters as an element. If you have understood it briefly, please type into the chat yes, or simply just say thumbs up, or say whatever you want to say, that yes, I have understood or we have understood. Because now we are going to move to the next element, which is settings. Settings is something which is about, setting is about where the story is taking place, where in terms of location. It also defines the specific time at what the story is taking place, the condition, the climatic condition, or any other atmospheric condition where the story is taking place. Uh, this is an element which author usually describes the environment, the surroundings, the location, and the other details which takes us to that place. So, when the author is writing about the story, the settings of the story, he uses a lot of imagery. Imagery is something where author uses words which evokes our senses. And because of that, in the settings, the author takes the readers to that place. Imagine when the author uses words as chilly winters or the hot summer. There was this hot summer, or there was this desert where the sand was not even moving, the trees were not, they were barren. Suddenly, as readers, we move to that particular location. And the authors mostly, when they start the story, they say it like this, that on a cold wintry night, there was the mountains and the whole city was clad with white snow. So suddenly, when we close our eyes, we just find ourselves in that particular setting. And this is also the reason why authors and the people say that stories make us travel. Stories take us to various parts of the world. When we read a story about a village in Mexico or a village in Australia or any anything like that, we suddenly travel to that particular village because the author writes about setting in such a manner that we are traveling through that place with the author and we become a part of that story. So it's very important. The setting plays a very important role. Definition wise, very simple. It's the location of where the story is taking place. But how to write the settings, how to use the correct descriptions, how to use the correct adjectives, how to infuse it with the right amount of imagery is what makes the setting a success or a failure. So when you want to write, it will be very important for each one of you to practice settings, writing about setting of a story. Quickly, to understand by giving examples, who is going to tell me, again taking the example of Cinderella, who's going to tell me where is the setting of the story Cinderella? Can we check the chat box, Himanshu, to understand what is their understanding of settings as far as Cinderella's story is concerned?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
The question is, where does the setting of
Yeah,
Cinderella story
where
take
is
place?
the setting of the story Cinderella?
Right. So Shabrish Naidu saying the castle. Ayush Sharde saying the palace.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
absolutely correct. So Cinderella's story primarily moves through the castle, whether it's the castle or the town where Ella lived with her father and that was taken over by stepmom, because that's also, he was a very wealthy man and he also stayed in nothing less than a castle. Then the story moves to the royal palace where the ball is taking place. So the story moves in and around the castle. Let me also ask my children about their famous and their favorite Harry Potter. Who's going to tell me what do you think is the main setting of Harry Potter as a story?
Sure.
Yeah.
So kids, what is the main setting of Harry Potter? Um, Again, so Archana is saying the kingdom. Pavan is saying a castle.
Harry Potter. No. Have you, are
Harshita,
you too
Patil,
young to have read Harry Potter?
I think a lot of students have read. I'm getting a lot of responses. So Harshita is saying school. Uh, Bhagyashree is
Yeah,
saying the magical
that's
school.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So I'm
Housing.
assuming that some children might not have read Harry Potter, but all those who have read, they would take like a minute to tell that yes, it's the magical school. And who's my bright child who's going to tell me the name of that magic wizardry school? Come on, come on, come on.
Oh yeah, a
J.K.
lot
Rowling
of
will be
kids.
very happy.
Lot
Lot
of
of
kids
kids
have
know.
already
Yes,
replied. Yeah, Advita Shastrula has replied Hogwarts. So a lot of
yes,
kids have
Hogwarts.
replied.
Yeah,
Uday,
so
yeah.
good, because I think Harry Potter is one story that will remain with us like for all our years, because it's such a magically woven story and it's a delight for people like us who are educators to use the example of that story, uh, to teach and to kind of take it forward with the children. So I'm assuming that broadly you all have understood the meaning of settings. So we did two elements so far. We've talked about characters, where we talked about the definition of characters, the meaning of protagonist and antagonist. Don't get scared about these big words. They're easy words. And like I said, in the second session, which is next Sunday, we're also going to dwell further in details about characterization. So today, just learn and remember these two words, protagonist and antagonist. Then we talked about how the other characters also play a very important role in taking the story forward. Settings is the location, time, surroundings, environment. We also talked about how an author or a writer uses a lot of imagination, a lot of imagery, lots and lots of adjectives to describe the setting. Let me quickly share screen, because at this point I want to ask my readers few questions. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is not the right PPT. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So my first question is, what is a person or animal that takes part in the action of a story called as?
Sure. So kids, please type in your responses in the chat box. The question is, what is a person or animal that takes part in an action of a story called as?
We'll give you like maybe 10 seconds.
Sure. People have started typing in. Rahima is saying a character. Advita is saying a protagonist. A
Great.
lot of people are saying characters.
So the correct answer is characters. Whosoever has written protagonist is not the right answer because, like I said, protagonist is the main character. So if the question was, what is the main character of a story called as, then your answer would have been correct. But for this question, the answer is character. So that means children have understood this. Let's move to the second question. Yes. Time and location in which a story takes place is called as.
Same drill, kids. Please type in your responses in the chat box. The question is time and location in which a story takes place is called as. So Advita is saying setting. A lot of kids are now saying settings. Jia,
That's
Roshni,
correct.
Sangeeta.
That's the correct answer. So that means we have understood broadly what characters are and what is setting of a story. If there's any question, feel free to type it in the chat. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions if you have for characters, for setting, because for now we're going to move to the next element of a story, which is the most important and crucial part of the story, that's called as plot. If any one of you have heard the name plot, then it's easier to understand. But plot is where the action of the story is. It's basically the main action of the story, and the sequence of events in a story is what determines the plot. Now, each event causes or leads to the next. In a story, what happens is one event happens that leads to the other, that leads to the other, and that's how the story keeps on unfolding, keeps on unwinding, and keeps on taking us forward, and we keep traveling with the story. Now, how does this happen? How does a plot come to action? A plot is created through what is the next element, which is conflict. That is a struggle between two opposing forces. Now, at this stage, I am not going to talk about conflict because that's my next segment. But let's come back to the plot, which is the sequence of the events. What happens is that a story's sequence of events follow a standard path. It's called a story mountain or a story arc. And a story arc typically has 3 segments. Or let me just say it once again for you. That plot of each story moves in 3 segments. There is a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. So if you want to learn this as an acronym, it's a standard acronym that you can use to represent a plot. That's called BME. Now what happens is B is the beginning part of the story, M is the middle part of the story, and E is the end part of the story. That is how we represent a plot. That is how the sequence of a story or sequence of events in a story takes shape. It is also called, it also takes a shape of a story mountain or a story arc. We are going to talk about BME today, but story arc is scheduled for the next session, where we are talking in detail about how a story arc looks. There is a complete presentation on how it looks, how it is shaped, and how do we draw a story arc. But for today, let's talk about what is BME. What is the beginning of the story, and what is the middle of the story, and how does the story end. Now, what happens in the beginning part of a story, which is the introduction? It is called the introduction of a story. What happens is, in this part, the author describes where and when does the story takes place. Typically, in the beginning of a story, the characters are introduced and the problem is introduced. The readers of the story or the viewers of the story, audience of the story, is introduced with characters as well as the problem of the story. And the main setting of the story is also introduced. Where and when does the story takes place? That is what happens in the beginning of a story. Now, middle of the story, what happens in the middle of a story is, what does the character do to solve the problem? How is the character strategizing or planning to solve the problem? And what are the other problems that character enforces with, if there's any? if there's any other problem, if there's any other situational issue that arises in a story, the character is introduced to. That happens in the middle of the story. As an end of the story is how does the story shapes to take an end, or how is the problem solved towards the end, is what happens as a part of E, or as a part of end of the story. So let's understand it with the example of the same story, that is Cinderella. If there's anybody who can explain it to me, that how, what do you feel is the beginning part of the Cinderella story? What all will be covered in the beginning part of Cinderella's story? Is there anyone who wants to explain it to me? If you have understood the beginning part, what all do you think would come in the beginning part of the Cinderella as a story?
Sure.
And don't
Kids,
worry, maybe
yeah,
I can explain it in, if you don't know.
sure. Kids, I've started typing in the chat box, but I think it's slightly bigger. People are typing in
Yeah.
Cinderella.
So let's give them like a minute or so, or maybe 30-40 seconds.
Yeah. So Arushi Sharda is saying her father leaves and stepmother tortures Cinderella.
Yeah. Yeah. So she's right, absolutely. So beginning part is where Cinderella, or Ella is her name, where she's left alone because her father dies, and she's left with her stepmom, stepsister, and how they make her do hard work and the house chores. And there's one more thing that is going to be covered in the beginning part. Like I said, the problem is introduced in the beginning of the story. So what do you think will be introduced in the beginning of the story? The invitation that comes from the ball, that is going to be introduced in the beginning part of the story. So till the time there is Ella, her stepmom, stepsisters, the house chores, and the invitation comes, and the stepsister decides to go, is beginning part. Now, what happens in the middle part of the story? What is going to be covered in the middle chunk of the story? Is there anyone who's writing?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of kids are typing in responses. So, kids, what happens in the middle part of the story? Please share it in your chat boxes. Yeah, kids are still typing in about the first part, about the beginning. Yeah.
No issues. No issues. We'll wait.
Amna, Michael, Priyanshi says a mother dies and father marries another lady. This
That's
is
beginning. Yeah,
all
that's
the
beginning. But that's
beginning.
okay. That means they have understood the crux of what a beginning is, because it's very important. They all, I'm assuming they all want to write short stories, so they have to understand these elements. So
Yeah.
while you're writing, let me also share this, that in the middle part of the story, what you will cover is a major chunk of the story where Cinderella wants to go to the ball, but the stepsisters refuse. They decide, one of them decides to wear Ella's dress, which is Ella's mother's dress. Then somehow God Fairy comes and she helps Ella to, not just look like a fairy, but also gives her the carriage and the other things that takes her to the ball. And how she and the prince meets in the ball, falls in love with each other at first sight, how she leaves her glass slipper, and how Prince decides that he's going to marry the one who fits into the glass slipper, whose foot fits into the glass slipper. So all this will be covered in the middle of the story. Now, last is the end part of the story, where the story is taking a resolution. Story is taking an ending. Now, what happens in the ending part is where the prince reaches Ella's house and finds that the shoe belongs to Ella, and that's where he decides to punish Ella's stepmom and stepsisters while she refuses to do so. And the last part, where Prince decides to marry Ella and takes her to the castle. This portion of the story will come in the end part of the story. So if you take any story, whether it's a story in a written form, or a story from a Bollywood or a Hollywood movie, or even the story of an ad, an advertisement, each story will have the sequence of events moving through these three segments: beginning, middle, and end. So all those who want to write in their life, all of you who wants to write short stories, fictional or non-fictional, or stories for your diary entries, stories for your school magazines, remember that you'll have to define the characters, you'll have to define the settings, and then you'll have to write down a plot. And the plot will have how the story will move. What are going to be the sequence of events in my story? That will make a major chunk of your story. So tell me if you have understood till now. If there's any question, feel free to write it in the chat, because we have covered a substantial portion of how is a story comprised of, or what is a story comprised of. What are the various elements of stories? We have covered characters, we have covered settings, we have talked about plot. Now we are going to the fourth element, which is the conflict. And conflict is also a general term for problems. Now, conflict is something which is the obstacle part of the story, the hindrance part of the story, or as they say, the main problem of the story, which the actor or which the protagonist is fighting for. It could be a cause, it could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be a situation. The problem could be any. But the problem is what the main character in a story is fighting for. And once the problem is solved, the story has to end. And till the time the problem is there, the story remains. And sometimes the author smartly chooses to move from one problem to the other, and to the other, and to the other. And those kind of stories have multiple climaxes. Can you give me an example of a story which has moved from one problem to the other, to the other, and to the other, and then finally it ends? And this is a story which is called multiple climax story. And we just took an example of this particular story.
Yeah. So Harsimrat Kaur is saying Harry Potter.
Aha, very good, Harsimrat. Thank you so much. No, that's a correct answer. So Harry Potter is very nicely written by J.K. Rowling, and imagine J.K. Rowling wrote this story of 7 books together. So she did not end when she wrote the first part, then she wrote the second, then she wrote the third. She never knew that she was writing the sequel. She was only writing the story because in the first story only her antagonist was Voldemort. And then she defined that why should I kill Voldemort in the first story itself? Then she gave birth to Horcruxes. And that's how the 7 Horcruxes came, and then each story is woven so nicely that it gave birth to 7, or I think 7 parts of the story. 7 books or 7 movies. That each story has its own structure, has its own element. So, and they're also linked and not linked. So it's not that if you don't watch the first movie, you won't understand the third. There is a linkage, but yet the stories are woven so beautifully. Because the main character, the settings, and the other characters remain same. There's Dumbledore in all the stories, there's Harry in the stories, there's Hermione in the story, then there's the friend. What is his name? What is the name of Harry's friend? I'm forgetting.
Ron.
Sorry? Yeah, Ron Weasley, yes. So these are the main characters of the story. They remain same, but every story would introduce you to the new settings, a little bit of new setting, and 1 or 2 main characters, a new character, sorry. So that's the power of how the story settings and how the characters and how the plot carries and the conflict carries. So each part of Harry Potter has a new conflict. Somewhere he's fighting the first Horcrux, then he's fighting the second one, then he's fighting with the third, and so on and so forth. And it's Harry in all the stories, but he's fighting different conflicts in different parts of the stories. So that's how the story is unfolding. Now, coming to the conflict, I want to also tell my children about there are 2 main types of conflict: the internal conflict and the external conflict. Now, as the name suggests, external conflict is something which is happening with the outside world. And let's remember one thing, that the conflict of a story is a problem or a hindrance or an obstacle between the main character, and anything else. So the conflict has to impact the main character, either directly or indirectly. So if it is within the character's self or his or her fate, that is internal conflict. If the conflict revolves around the character and his own self or her own self, that's internal conflict. Can you tell me the example of any such story or movie where you think that there's internal conflict? Let's give like 10-20 seconds, Himanshu.
Sure. Kids, yeah, you
Yeah.
please type in the chat box. Sony Lamba is saying Lion King. Krishna is saying Frozen.
Lion King. Lion King is correct.
Yeah. Angra is saying Goosebumps. Kids
Oh,
read a lot
Goosebumps is
of
there.
stories as well. Yeah.
I can give you a quick example of Charlie and Chocolate Factory, where Willy Wonka is living in the story with the internal conflict. So thank you so much for writing in, because that shows me these questions and these answers show me that yes, you all are understanding, and it also helps others who are there as listeners, who are there being a part of this session. So internal conflict, where the conflict is between the character, central character, and his or her own self, and the whole story revolves around that. Then there is something called as external conflict. Now, external conflict. As the name suggests, here the conflict is between the character and the outside environment. Now, external conflict is also two, three types. The first is where the conflict is between the central character and the character with the negative shades. Quickly tell me the name of the character with the negative shade. Can somebody quickly write for everybody? What did we learn? What is the name of the character with a negative shade called as?
Yeah, yeah. Kids are typing in antagonists.
Antagonist. Very good. And the main character? Can somebody write main character also?
So Ganesh, Ayush. Kids are
Have they
typing in
written?
antagonist. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So when the conflict is between the protagonist and the antagonist is called the conflict with a character. Character versus character. Because protagonist is also a character, antagonist is also a character. So give me an example of a conflict which is between two characters. Any example? We just have been talking about Harry Potter. There's a biggest example of conflict between character and character. So in Harry Potter, the conflict is between Harry and Voldemort. So this is how we define character versus character conflict. The second type of external conflict is where the conflict is between character and society. So you live in a society, a community, and your conflict is with that society. You're the main character, your conflict is within the society. Any example? Anybody?
Yeah. Kids, they've started typing in. Satnam saying Moana. Then there is.
No. No, Moana is not the right example. I mean, it is, because she was also fighting for the societal norms. But Moana is an example of some other conflict type, which we are going to cover. But any
Krita is an
movie or any
example of.
story that you read or see, which is for social cause, will be a story which will fall in the conflict of character versus society. All the story books that you read about Gandhi or about any political leader, they will be stories of character conflict between character and the society. Yeah, understood? Just if you have understood, keep writing in your chat comment sections as thumbs ups. Yes. So this is the second type of external conflict. The third and the last type of external conflict is conflict between a character and nature, where the main character is fighting a lot with the nature to reach to a solution or to fight for a cause, a natural calamity or a problem which revolves around nature. So when somebody said Moana, in the movie Moana, what happens is that she's fighting with the natural calamity a lot for changing what is happening in her community. So that will be a classic example of a conflict of character versus nature as well as society. Another classic example of character versus nature is Life of Pi. If you have not seen or read the story, I insist that you must watch the movie Life of Pi, where it's a complete depiction of how the conflict revolves between the character, who's Pi, and the natural calamity, the nature, that how he fights with nature as the main conflict in the movie, and he reaches the end part of the story. So this is where the explanation around conflicts ends. But I hope you all have understood about conflict, because most important is to understand the plot and conflict, because that gives birth to how your story will shape. You'll write about the characters, you'll describe, you'll give physical attributes to characters, you'll also talk about how my characters look, what does my character like to wear, what is it that my character likes a lot, and what is it that my character doesn't like at all, and loves the most, hates the most. So you'll give those character points to define your character. Similarly, settings also will happen, because you will use a lot of adjectives, you'll use a lot of description, you'll use a lot of imagery, and you'll define the settings. The main hard work comes when you sit and starts to write about the plot and the conflict. That's why plot and conflict go hand in hand, because depending on the conflict, you will arrive and derive at how the sequence of events will take place. So when Roald Dahl would have started writing about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he would have defined that, okay, my central character would be Charlie and Willy Wonka, and I'll have other characters, those for the kids, and my setting would happen in Wonka's chocolate factory. And then he would have thought, or he would have first thought about the conflict, that there'll be this character XYZ whose conflict will be within his own self, because of what his father did to him, because of all the insecurities and inhibitions he had lived through. And he would become a certain type that would have given birth to the name Willy Wonka and the appearance of Willy Wonka. Why he would always wear that long hat, why he would always carry a wand-looking stick, why he would carry a very strange kind of smile, why would he be given a special piece of suit that he would wear. All those physical attributes would have come later. But first, Roald Dahl would have defined and designed the main plot and the conflict problem of the story. And then he would have decided that the first part or the beginning part of the story would have these many things, where children would be introduced to the golden ticket, how they will enter the factory, and the mesmerizing look of the chocolate factory, and the introduction to Oompa Loompas. And the middle part of the story is where the action would take place, where the four other children will suffer what they suffer in the story.
Sonia, we can quickly take a question here. Some of the kids have started typing in questions, and please keep typing question skills. So Advaita Shastrula, class 7, Peters High School, Sangareri, is really enjoying the class, but he wants to understand how to get the inspiration to write and narrate stories.
Okay, very, very interesting question, first of all. So the question has two parts. How do you get inspired to write, and how do you inspire to tell? The answer is one. The questions are two. The answer is one. Read. Read as much as you can. The only way you can write or tell stories is read, because reading gives you so much of inspiration, so much of perspective, so much of point of view, that you start to imagine that I want to write about this. When you read about Harry Potter, who would have thought of a school of wizardry, a magical Hogwarts, and whatever J.K. Rowling has shown to us or given to us. But now we are so inspired that I want to write something like that. Or when Ruskin Bond writes about hills and mountains, then we go back to our childhood and wants to write like that. When Sudha Murthy writes about her childhood she has spent with her Aji, that's grandmother, we go back to our timings of when we used to be kids and spend time with our grandparents. Gives us so much of inspiration. And children, one thing for sure, if you don't read, you can never write. Read anything that comes to you. And my request and humble request to parents is, don't force a choice or a genre to your children. Even at this age, even if a child of class 7 wants to pick up a picture book, let him or her pick up the picture book and read. Because the picture book says 1,000 words, even if it is made up of 200 words, but there's a lot a child can take from picture book. You never know, your child might become a picture book author. So to answer your question, the only thing that you should do to inspire is read a lot. And when you read, retell. For example, if you have read the story Charlie and Chocolate Factory, try and write it in your own style. If you were to write Charlie and Chocolate Factory, how differently you would have written. And like Chetan Bhagat said, that write to express, don't write to impress. I think that's a very valid point. And I think Chetan says this in all his sessions. I have attended like multiple sessions of him, but this is one constant thing that he says. That don't always write to impress, that, oh, I want to write with big words, fancy jargons, and not. Why is Chetan a much loved author? Because he writes so simple. His stories are so simple, it feels that, oh, it's happening to you. But read and retell, that's the only inspiration. Is there any other question, Himanshu?
We'll keep shooting in. A lot of people are like Harshita Patil, Anita Ansai. They're loving the session, so giving a lot
Thank
of
you.
good feedback.
Thank you. So this brings us to the last segment of elements of a story, which is resolution, or the end part of the story. Now, what happens in the end part of the story is the story comes to the last segment, where the resolution is going to take place, which means the conflict is going to be solved. The conflict is going to be solved. The protagonist emerges as a winner. The antagonist goes, either dies, vanishes, or just disappears from the story in some way or the other. Like in Harry Potter, Voldemort dies. All the 7 Horcruxes are killed. In Cinderella, the stepmom and the stepsisters are taken to some other part of the country or town or wherever they are shown. So it depends on the story to story, depends on how author wants to end the story. But the conflict is solved. The problems is solved towards the resolution part, and that's why it's called the end. You must have also heard about a term called climax. Now, climax, sometimes children confuse climax with ending. It's untrue. Climax is where the story is on the peak and takes a downward moment. What is a climax? What happens when the story is moving in the downward before reaching the resolution? All this is planned for the second session. So make sure that you come and attend the second session, because we are going to talk about story arc. We are going to talk about story mountain. We are going to do an exercise around story arc. We are going to spend a good chunk of time understanding characters and characterization. Now, before we close, I also want to give you a quick handy tip to remember these 5 elements. We all love ice cream. So if you can draw a nice ice cream cone with 5 ice cream layers on top of it. If you have a piece of paper or pen, you can just draw it right away. That make a nice ice cream cone with 5 layers of your butterscotch or vanilla scoops, and in each layer write an alphabet starting with S, C, O, O, P. That's scoop. That stands for ice cream scoop. Now, what does each letter stand for is the element of a story. So, S stands for settings. The top scoop of the ice cream is S, that's settings. C stands for characters, which is again the most important element. O stands for oh no, which is another name of the problem. Okay, which is the another name for problem. The second O stands for order of events, which is the sequence of events, which is the other name for plot. And P stands for problem resolved, that is end of the story. So it's a very handy way of remembering the 5 elements of story for anybody. It's called an ice cream scoop, SCOOP, settings, characters, oh no, the problem, order of events, plot, P, problem resolved, end. Now, with this, we have covered the 5 elements. I'm going to now take you to the screen where I have a quiz plan for you. And oh, yeah, it's right here. My first question is, what is a problem in a story called as? Let's quickly see who's writing it in the chat.
Yeah. Kids, please start typing in your responses to the question. What is a problem in a story called as?
This should be easy, children.
So Vidya Nambiar is saying conflict. Dilshad is
Yes,
saying conflict.
that's correct.
Swani conflict, yeah.
That's correct. It's absolutely correct as a question and answer. My next question is, what is the conclusion of a story called as?
Kids have started typing in again. So Sujata is saying the end,
Yeah,
ending.
end or resolution. It could be called
Uh,
end or it could be called resolution. Okay.
yeah.
Next question. What are the three stages in a plot known as?
Right, kids, we move to the next question. What are the three stages in a plot known as? Yeah, so kids are typing in the responses to the second one. The kids who are typing in setting,
No, no, no,
Sakshi
no.
saying problem, saying
No, the three stages are beginning,
BME. So
middle, end.
Vidya,
BME. Yeah. If
yeah.
somebody has
So
written
Vidya
BME,
Nambiar, yeah, Archana Bharti, Akshat Agnihotri, all of these kids have written BME.
superb. So there is a big thing with all the children who have responded correctly to any question. What we're going to do is we'll try and take all those names and we're going to put it on our main slide before we begin the next session next Sunday. I hope that's possible, Himanshu.
Yes, absolutely, we'll do
Okay,
that.
great. Before we wind up, I also want to leave all my children with this little exercise. And Himanshu will explain to you how you're going to submit it. But let me explain to you what you have to do. You see a nice scenery kind of a thing here on the screen. All you have to do is you have to look at it and use a lot of descriptive words, a lot of adjectives, imagery, and imagery means that you use words which evoke our senses, and write down the setting part of it. Imagine this is a picture given to you to use this as the setting of your story. So don't involve anything about characters, don't involve anything about plot or anything about conflict. Just write few lines, maybe 5 to 6 lines about describing this as settings. While you do that, you use a lot of descriptive words, adjectives, you use a lot of imagination and imagery. Now, how you're going to do it in terms of submitting it, over to you, Himanshu, to explain to the children how they will do this.
Sure. So
Yeah.
kids and parents, please note, so just below the video in the comment section, in the description of the video, you will find a link to submit the assignment. So I would request all of you, either you can come back and see the link. The link will always be there below the video in the description, or you can copy paste the link and save it. So if you open it, it will open a Google form, or the question and the activity details are given in the Google form as well. All you need to do is, once the student has prepared the response in either a Word document or a PDF, whatever format, all you have to do is upload that file in the Google form once it's done, and given the name of the students. So the top 10 students whose activities we feel are the best, their names will be displayed right before we start the next session. It'll be a huge recognition in front of thousands of students. So we'll really request parents, if you can get the students to try out this activity, good, medium, whatever, like, whatever they are able to do, it's about trying. So request all of you to just make sure your kids try out this activity. If you have any questions around this activity, kids, feel free to type in the chat box, right? And in the meantime, we're taking 2 3 questions which kids have uh, asked during this time. So
Sure.
Jayanti had asked how to conclude any story. Like, I think she's been able to start or start with some of the ideas, but never able to conclude any story. So any tips on that, Sonia?
Yes, a quick one would be you need to understand while you're writing that how are you resolving the conflict. So if your conflict is decently getting resolved, whatever it is, remember that we talked about a conflict of various types. You need to identify and put your conflict in those segments and then arrive at the conclusion. I think that will help you once you define the type of conflict that you're showing. So if, for example, if it's a conflict between your main character and the antagonist, then your conclusion and the resolution would be Either you may decide to kill the antagonist, or you may decide to, take him away from the storyland or your land of setting, or you may just make him good soul or good character. But defining the conflict will give you a good idea or a good hand to arrive at your resolution.
All right, thank you, Sonia.
Yeah.
Arushi is asking, is it important to have a very good vocabulary, or can we write if we know simple words as well?
Absolutely simple words makes a book hit. Don't go by big fancy jargons or big fancy words. Not always. Not always. Again, I would, if Chetan allows me, I will use his quote, that right to express. And your expression is best when you use your own words, when the words come from the heart, not from the mind. Always write with the heart. No, don't write with the mind in it. And when you write with the heart and when you write to express, it's always simple. Because we think simple, na? We never think complicated. We always think in simple ways. So it's better to write in a simple words. And then if you want to impress, use dictionary. If you want to include good big words, but write simple
Right, thank you,
words.
Sonia. Last question, Ashok Bhai Patel is asking, ma'am, do you feel ever like quitting while starting any story in the beginning of any story writing?
Many times. Many times, because that happens with all of us. Now we start to write with a very interesting, exciting plot, but वो एक दो lines लिख के, we have just done 2 or 3 lines, and then we are not thinking, we are not able to move forward, and we tear the page, throw it in the garbage bin, and then we are demotivated. Now I don't want to write. Don't do that. So it happens with all of us. It happens with all of us. Remember Thomas Edison, though he was not a writer, but I'm taking his example. He failed 10,000 times before he gave us his invention. And he said that he had not failed. He had learned 10,000 ways of not doing it. So remember that. Remember these nice learnings from people, from inventors, from scientists, from writers, from everybody across us. One good tip I want to give to all of you is observe. You got to be a very big observer if you want to write, because writers take inspiration from what happens around them. Taking you back to the examples of J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling observed everything from her surroundings. The 9-quarter platform, the train, the Hogwarts look, even the Harry Potter's glasses. Everything she got from what she observed from her surroundings. Even the how the hands of those bank people would look. What were they called? I'm forgetting the name. But she observed the bank manager who would release, who would give her the checks, and that gave birth to how they will look in the story, how they will look in the movie. So observation is a very important tool that we mostly forget, but remember that's the most important tool an author has.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sonia. So we'll wrap up the questions. Once again, kids, I think some of you are asking where the link is for submitting the assignment. So if you're accessing it from your mobile phone, just next to the title of the session where it says Sonia Bareja at LEAD Masterclass, there is a small drop down button. If you tap on the drop down button, you will see the description of the overall video, overall session. Right there at the top is the link, right? And it is also pinned right at the top in our comment box, in the comment box, right? So you can take it either from the description or the comment box. Please do click on the link, open the Google form, and you can submit your assignment once done. Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you so much, kids, everybody, all the parents, for coming here. We really hope this was really interesting and useful. We hope to see each and every one of you at 3 o'clock next Sunday, same time, same place, and have a very good rest of the week. Hope to get a lot of assignments from you. Take care. Enjoy. Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. See you next Sunday. Thanks, Himanshu. We're good to go, Himanshu?
Yes, we're good to go. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.